Why do most TEDx talks get seen by only a few hundred people? The statistics are depressing. 76% of all TEDx talks published in the month of October 2021 had less than 1,000 views. On that month, on average, the TEDx talks had only 411 views, and the lowest number of views was one talk that had only 26 views. These numbers led Bilyana Georgieva, the curator of the unofficial top 10 world TEDx charts, to suggest that these numbers indicate a limited reach beyond family and friends. I believe that this statistic is actually a far more worrisome indicator. Only a small number of speakers ever manage to get chosen to present an idea worth spreading on a TED or a TEDx stage. Would it not be a tragedy if only a few hundred heard it? TED and TEDx stages are an incredible forum for really amazing, transformative, earth-shaking ideas. For me, the problem is not the lack of ideas. It is the lack of reach of these great ideas and the lost opportunity for great impact that should really concern us. It is not the ones that get millions of views that should matter. It is the many that do not get seen that are concerning. The tree that falls unseen and unheard in the forest only becomes compost. For an idea to spread, it requires to be shared. It needs to persist in the global conversation. Most people think of a talk going viral as strictly the number of people that come into contact with the viral message and share or infect other people. But there is actually a second part of this equation that is just as important, and I'll come back to it. But let's first look at the nature of viruses. What makes one viral infection produce a simple family outbreak, another an epidemic, and a third a pandemic? The answer lies in the power of connection and engagement in a community to determine survival and propagation. And it turns out that nature has figured this out long before us. For a viral outbreak, three possibilities exist for the potential transmission or decline of a disease, depending on the average number of people who will contract it from one person with that infection. If an infected person spreads the infection to less than one other person, then the disease will decline in the community and eventually die out because the transmission is less than a 1:1 ratio. But if each infected person spreads the infection to one other person, then the disease will stay alive and stable. It'll be an endemic in the community, but it will not become an outbreak or an epidemic. This is a 1:1 transmission ratio. But if each infection causes more than one new infection, it is a greater than 1:1 transmission ratio, and there may be an outbreak or an epidemic. In the early days of COVID, the transmission was 1:3 to 1:6, which explains the wildfire spread of the disease in a classic case of global virality. When you frame this in the context of a message, think of the population of infected individuals as a community and think of the virus as a message that is passed on in the community. An infection propagation rate of 3 or higher makes it very likely that the spread would become exponential. But the first criteria for exponential spread is ease of transmission and penetration. Viruses accomplish this by using specialized structures on their surface that bind to receptors on the human host cell. Once this binding takes place, the virus penetrates the human host cell and delivers its payload of infective genetic material for the human cell to make copies of and spread it. Well, in the case of a video or a talk that becomes viral, the message has to capture the engagement of the audience by exciting a portion of their brain that is the seat of their emotion called the amygdala. The human brain is an amazing organ, and we commonly pride ourselves as creatures of reason and intellect. Our rational and intellectual functions reside in the portion of our brain called the neocortex, which is all this area that I show in this model. But our emotions reside in a deep-seated primitive part of the brain known as amygdala, shown by these two red peanut-sized circles. The amygdala is where we live and experience fear, fury, rage, love, lust, affection, attraction, repulsion, disease, desire, sexual proclivity, procreative drives, possession, territoriality, tribalism, and so on. And only a talk or a video that excites our emotional centers in the amygdala will be remembered, because the amygdala is tightly connected with memory. And contrary to popular belief, we decide with our emotions that reside in the centers of the amygdala, the primitive brain, and we use the intellectual reasoning of the neocortex to justify our choice, justify our emotional choice, and execute the gut instinctual choices of our emotional centers. The best TED and TEDx talks all have the same mechanism. They operate by artful delivery that activates the emotional centers of the amygdala, and they support it with the rationalizations of the neocortex. They use the connection of emotion. They use the connection of emotion stitched together with the threads of neocortical reasoning. And through this connection, they create a communion with the audience. And through communion, communication is established and a community is created. A community is not a collection of bodies occupying the same space. A community is a collection of hearts speaking the same speech. When Martin Luther King declares, "I have a dream," he activates the amygdala of 100,000 listeners on the reflecting pool at the foot of Lincoln Memorial, and 100,000 hearts respond with the same speech, "I have a dream." But simple activation of emotion will not allow for persistence of the message. For that, something more is needed. And this is where we learn a lesson from Africa. On the African savannah, grazing animals never drink at the waterhole alone. There will be zebra, giraffe, wildebeest, warthogs, elephant, and antelope all gathered around a single waterhole, even when many mouths are confronted with a shrinking resource. The answer lies in the safety they experience from predation. As a diverse community with varied levels of sensory and situational awareness, they can keep each other safe and hence increase the odds that all of them have the best opportunity for both water consumption and survival. Since either alone is meaningless. These two examples from biology demonstrate that viruses and warthogs use a strategy for their own propagation and survival that may be called the viral waterhole effect. And that is the greatest chance for successful growth and survivability of any endeavor happens when a community of new participants are engaged in each round of propagation. And it was this principle that I wanted to capture in my journey towards the TEDx stage. 90 days before my talk, I used the same community effect to propagate my TEDx talk. I started writing blogs, posts, articles, and newsletters about my selection and preparation, my flubs and successes, my anxieties and my excitement. With each post, I was creating ripples of engagement and successive cycles of exposure to my message of my impending talk. My 5,000 patients, my 2,000 Facebook friends and followers, my 1,500 LinkedIn connections, my high school in Eastern India with 5,000 students where I had graduated from 50 years earlier, they were my community for the virus of my message. My community was getting a weekly exposure, twice a week, about my journey, and their fever was mounting along with mine. Viruses use structures on their surface to attach to the surface of human cells that they penetrate and infect. And my writings and posts were acting like the attachment receptor that viruses use and were connecting my community to the message of my impending talk. By the time I delivered my talk in October 2024, I had written enough material to compile all my articles and posts and blogs into a book that I published on Amazon at the same time as my talk went live on YouTube. I adopted the strategy of the waterhole by also adding live links to the talks of everyone in my community of speakers who shared the stage with me. In a chapter titled Celebrate Those You Meet, I wrote about the Gary, Indiana community, their aspirations and challenges. I wrote about how the TEDx event platform was acting as an agent of social change and revitalization of the Gary, Indiana community by bringing ideas of empowerment and hope from speakers all over the world. I wrote about the restaurant where I had my meals and included their website. I spoke of the wonderful service I received, the fantastic quality of their food, pictures of my experience, the Airbnb I stayed at, and its website featured prominently in my writings. By including all of them and the community and the speakers who shared my stage, I was analogously allowing my diverse herd of animals to drink with me at my waterhole. I then sent links to the talk and my book to my followers and my community. The effect was massive. Everyone in Gary, Indiana, all the speakers and my followers on social media shared the book and the talk widely to their networks. My high school principal held a watch party with the entire school, all 5,000 students of them. They shared and reshared it all over India and Southeast Asia. The talk went viral across the globe, crossed 300,000 views in 14 days, 600,000 in 28 days, and by 44 days, it had crossed 1 million. But there was a second half of the equation that I didn't realize that I had accidentally tapped into. By doing all this, instead of just making myself a single patient zero, I had made everyone who was part of my journey a patient zero as well. It became their talk as much as it was mine. My road to the red dot became their road. We became one community with a single shared idea infecting all of us, and everyone was a patient zero and a super spreader. All of us were one global community infected with the virus of my TEDx talk, sharing it in feverish engagement and excitement. The enduring message in all of this for all of us is that the power of community, connected by shared validation, that produces engagement in a shared idea and a common desire to collectively experience something that they can identify with, has the same operational characteristic as a viral pandemic. The need to be seen, heard, and validated is a fundamental trait of all humans. And when this need is coupled with an idea that people can emotionally engage with and that ignites their imagination with a sense of possibility and belonging, they naturally spread it to their network of friends and family. Except that this time, instead of people falling sick, they are all elevated to a higher state of shared existence. And that is an idea worth spreading and thinking again upon. Thank you.